Welcome to the Rugby Obsession Deep Dive. This week, well, we're not just summarizing. We're really digging into celebrating and analyzing what feels like a truly monumental moment in sports history. Our mission is to quickly but thoroughly unpack the 5 key takeaways, and they often overlap from our sources about the, well, historic 2025 Women's Rugby World Cup. We're focusing hard on the growth, which is just undeniable, the electric atmosphere, and, the critical path forward to keep this momentum going. This tournament wasn't just big. It really felt like a watershed moment, didn't it? Kind of redefined success in women's rugby.
Yeah.
So if you want to stay consistently informed about the biggest movements, the most important shifts happening in the world of rugby, make sure you subscribe to Rugby Obsession right now.
It really was a paradigm shift. You're right. Let's start with the result on the pitch, the definitive outcome. England, the Red Roses, they secured the title. Their first World Cup win since, 2014?
Yeah, 2014, they beat Canada 33-13 in the final. It was pretty fiercely contested.
It was. But that final score, as you said, it really only tells part of the story, doesn't it?
Exactly, because before that, Canada gave us what was arguably the moment of the tournament. Maybe one of the biggest upsets ever.
You mean the semifinal against New Zealand?
Yeah, that almighty effort, as the sources called it, just incredible drama. That's the kind of thing that grabs everyone, not just hardcore fans.
Absolutely delivered that unexpected thrill. But look, where this deep dive really shows the true scale of things is when you look at the numbers. What's fascinating is just how the sheer scale of public interest and attendance proves the demand for the sport has really hit a critical mass.
Okay, let's talk scale then. You mentioned the record books were rewritten.
Oh, they were pulverized, honestly. Starting with the final itself, Twickenham, right? The iconic home of English rugby.
Huge venue.
Massive, and they drew a staggering crowd of 81,885 spectators.
Wow.
Just think about that number for a second. That's a full house, a completely new benchmark for women's rugby attendance.
And what makes that even more significant, I think, is the context. This wasn't just, a London thing for locals. The organizers, according to the sources, were aiming for 350,000 tickets sold across the whole tournament.
Right, and they didn't just hit that target.
No.
They smashed it. Over 440,000 tickets sold.
440,000.
That tells you something, doesn't it? The official projections, they fundamentally underestimated the hunger that was out there. And it wasn't just bums on seats either. The final. Certified as the most watched women's rugby match ever.
Okay, what were the viewing figures?
A peak audience of 5.8 million viewers tuning in across the BBC TV and streaming combined.
5.8 million.
Yeah. This isn't just a niche sporting event anymore. It felt like a national cultural moment.
And for me, maybe the most crucial detail, especially thinking about future growth, is the geographical spread.
Yeah.
Our source material highlighted the opening match, Red Roses versus the USA. That game alone drew, 42,723 people.
Yep, 42,723.
In Sunderland, at the Stadium of Light.
And that specific detail is vital. It's one thing to sell out Twickenham, the traditional heartland.
Right.
But it's entirely another thing to pull in over 40,000 people up north. It proves the audience is broad, willing to travel, and crucially exists outside those established rugby bubbles. That willingness to support the women's game wherever it's played, that shows real, deep engagement.
So if that's the current scale, let's zoom out a bit. Look at the trajectory. Because when you compare 2025 to previous tournaments, the growth is, it's exponential. Almost unbelievable.
We really are in an era of explosive expansion. The easiest way to see it is probably looking at the average attendance per game. For this 2025 tournament, the average was 15,856 spectators per game.
15,856.
Yeah.
Average.
Average. Now let's rewind. Just see how fast things have changed, how quickly the sport has professionalized and captured the public imagination.
Okay, give us the comparison data. Let's see that contrast.
Okay, so 2021, just a few years back, the average was 5,385.
Okay. Still decent, but...
Right. Now go back to 2017. It was 1,514. 2014, it was 1,333. And if we go all the way back to the 2010 tournament, the average match attendance was just 1,000 people.
1,000. So in 15 years, 5 tournaments, the average interest level, measured by attendance, has shot up from 1,000 to nearly 16,000 per game.
That's a multiple of 15. More than 15, actually.
It's incredible. The aha moment here, I guess, is figuring out why that growth suddenly went exponential. It can't just be the quality of play improving, right? That's definitely happened.
That's the critical insight from the sources, I think. The cultural acceptance, the whole atmosphere on the event, they're just as responsible. The sources talk about the build-up, the game days. They describe a vibe that was different from the men's game. Lighthearted, fun, really inclusive, attracting men, women, boys, girls. People were coming for the festivities, as much as the actual result on the field.
And that atmosphere, that sense of celebration and inclusion, that becomes the engine for sustaining the growth, doesn't it?
Exactly.
It means the sport isn't just relying on the old guard, the existing rugby fans. It's actually inviting a whole new demographic in.
Precisely. When the atmosphere is welcoming, it just lowers the barrier to entry for, say, casual sports fans or families looking for a day out. That broad celebratory base is what lets you hold on to those new fans long after the final whistle. It turns a sporting event into more of a community event.
Okay, so, in the spirit of a proper deep dive, after celebrating all these unprecedented achievements, we do need to pivot. We need to look at the critical analysis, the hard questions that are necessary for the game's long-term health.
Yeah, constructive criticism, not negativity.
Exactly. It's needed for growth.
Absolutely. And while the skill levels, the athleticism at the top tier, England, Canada, France, New Zealand, it's phenomenal, really. But the sources do point to a vast, sometimes, frankly, alarming disparity between those top professional sides and the rest of the field. At times, this competitive imbalance, as one source put it, eliminated the joy of competition.
That's a pretty stark phrase. Eliminated the joy of competition. What kind of gap are we talking about here?
Well, we're seeing parallels sort of to the early days of men's international rugby, where the gap between the fully funded pros and the semi-pro or amateur teams was so wide that you'd routinely get defeats by 100 points or more.
Right. I remember some of those scores back in the day.
Yeah. The women's game is kind of hitting that challenge right now as professionalism accelerates so quickly, but only among the elite nations.
And the sources give a really powerful and actually quite sobering example of this structural problem.
They do. The case of Samoa, a purely amateur side. Tragically, they were thumped by almost 90 points by professional England.
Almost 90 points.
Yeah. And what makes this example really hit home, showing the global investment issue, is that the Samoan team had to basically crowdfund just to get the money to travel to the country and play.
Oh, wow.
They were competing against a team whose players are centrally contracted, training full-time, all the resources.
Okay, that puts the competitive gap into really sharp, necessary focus.
Yeah.
Because as a spectator, even if you admire the top-tier skill, it's hard to stay fully engaged when the outcomes feel like foregone conclusions so often.
It absolutely diminishes long-term spectator interest, no question. And this is the crucial policy challenge now. World Rugby has to use the massive financial momentum from the success to put, serious pressure on individual unions. They need to invest significantly in these smaller developing nations. If you want to keep that huge viewing audience we just talked about, the product needs to offer, gladiatorial clashes, not one-sided massacres. That proactive global investment is really the only thing that's going to foster the competitive balance needed for sustained success.
That's a really powerful argument for a more equitable future. We are trying to provide you with a complete shortcut here, a way to be well-informed about the biggest movements in rugby and the critical structural changes needed for the sport's future. So if you appreciate this kind of deep dive content and analysis, please do subscribe to Rugby Obsession. It helps us keep this knowledge flowing. Okay, moving on. Let's look at the long-term legacy. What does this English victory, this whole tournament, mean for the next generation of athletes? The sources sound incredibly optimistic here. They predict this will create a whirlwind movement for new players. They even draw comparisons to the ecosystem created by the men's 2003 World Cup win in terms of inspiration.
Yeah, that whirlwind movement idea, it's about more than just participation numbers. It's about the quality pipeline. The prediction is pretty clear. Girls who were inspired watching the 2025 Red Roses, when they enter the sport in, say, 10 or 15 years, they'll just have inherently higher skill levels, better conditioning, more precise, specific training from a younger age. The talent ceiling is about to get smashed.
But seizing that opportunity, that requires immediate action at the grassroots level, doesn't it?
Precisely. The sources really emphasize this. Rugby clubs worldwide, they can't just wait for central funding to trickle down. They need volunteers right now stepping up to run girls' youth teams, ladies' teams, making the game accessible, fun, non-intimidating at the local level. That's the essential, immediate action needed to turn this World Cup inspiration into actual future pros.
And as the sport grows, professionalizes, the final major takeaway from the sources seems to focus on the need to cultivate recognizable stars, the faces of the game. Every major sport needs those individuals who kind of transcend the game itself, like Jonah Lomu in men's rugby back in the day, or maybe Caitlin Clark in the WNBA now.
Absolutely. And the sources suggest women's rugby is already finding these key personalities. They highlight names like Ellie Kildunne, Sophie de Godet, Ilona Mar. These are players who aren't just incredibly skilled. They have unique personal brands, a certain flair that drives viewership and interest.
I loved the analogy the sources used here to describe their quality. It made me think of the Brazilian football team in the 2002 World Cup.
Oh, yeah. Rivaldo, Ronaldinho, Ronaldo.
Exactly. That incredible, almost joyous improvisational flair they had. The sources suggest women's rugby is benefiting from a similar aesthetic right now because, and this is the quote, it hasn't been overcoached yet.
That distinctiveness, that individuality, it's absolutely essential for creating heroes and selling tickets, isn't it? These players have a really palpable, entertaining individuality, and this leads directly to the strongest final recommendation from the source material, which is that women's rugby needs to consciously throw away any remaining shackles and let these players be who they are on and off the field.
What exactly are these shackles referring to? Is it like overly cautious media training, restrictive sponsorship rules, or maybe just an outdated perception of what a female athlete should be?
I think it's probably a combination of all of that. The pressure sometimes to be uniform, to follow a rigid script, maybe tone down their personality for certain sponsors or media narratives. The sources argue pretty strongly that the sport must fully embrace, maybe even actively commercialize, the individual flair, the unique styles, the powerful personalities of these athletes. That relatability, that authenticity, that's going to be the rocket fuel for keeping hold of this huge new audience they've just captured. So yeah, when we sort of synthesize these 5 takeaways, what we're left with is this dual achievement, really. On one hand, immense celebration over the massive record set, viewership, attendance, all of that, but coupled with a very clear, positive, but also challenging path forward. And that path requires, number 1, serious global investment in competitive balance, and number 2, the strategic decision to really embrace star power and the individual flair of the players.
It really does set up a fascinating decade ahead, doesn't it? We've seen this staggering 15x increase in average attendance in just 15 years. But the provocative question I want to leave with you, our listener, to maybe mull over is this. What actually happens to the competitive balance and maybe the ultimate talent ceiling when this current necessary push for global investment in youth development really fully matures? Will we inevitably see global dominance by just a few top nations, like we sometimes see elsewhere? Or could this strategic focus on competitive fairness actually create a more exciting, more balanced product than even the men's game has managed today? Something to think about. We really want to hear directly from you on this. What player stood out most to you during the tournament, or what was the most surprising moment for you? The most joyful, the most dramatic? Share your comments with Rugby Obsession. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the historical significance and the future path of the 2025 Women's Rugby World Cup, please hit that subscribe button right now for more exclusive, well-informed content like this. Thank you for listening to the Rugby Obsession Deep Dive, and we will look forward to you listening to our next episode.